Today, we are unpacking a highly debated, really fascinating shift in global relationship dynamics. We're breaking down a recent episode of the Turning Point podcast, and let me tell you, it makes some incredibly bold claims about exactly why Western men are leaving their local dating markets entirely. All right, let's just dive right into this. Why are successful Western men looking east? The source material poses this exact question right out of the gate. And to be clear, they aren't talking about men who just can't get a date. No, they are looking at stable, highly successful men who are literally deleting their dating apps at home to find partners overseas, specifically in places like the Philippines. So what is actually driving this exact demographic away? Section 1. The Western Dating Mirage, a broken ecosystem. The podcast's first major argument points right to this idea. They claim that the modern dating ecosystem in the West hasn't just changed, it has become fundamentally exhausting for the men trying to navigate it. Listen to this quote because it vividly illustrates their view. The source describes relationships in the West as being treated like, quote, a temporary smartphone upgrade. You know, you use it until you get bored and then you just swipe for the very next model. It's a pretty intense metaphor, for sure, but it perfectly captures the source's perspective on the sheer disposability of modern romance. The source breaks down this massive exhaustion into a few key areas. They frame the Western dating experience as this hyper-individualistic society that's entirely driven by fast-paced transactions. Hookup culture, they argue, has basically become the default setting, completely stripping away deep intimacy. And they even point out that infidelity is increasingly normalized as just a simple mistake. You know, the source goes way deeper than just dating app fatigue. That brings us to Section 2. Biology and divorce fears, the cultural clash. The podcast sets up a pretty stark contrast here. On one side, you have what they term Western conditioning. This is a cultural narrative where women are encouraged to be hyper-competitive and where creating a family is increasingly viewed as, well, a burden. On the flip side, they place male biology. The source claims that a man is biologically hardwired with this innate drive to provide, to protect, and to anchor a family. When these two opposing forces meet, the podcast argues that a man's intrinsic purpose is effectively hollowed out. And then we hit this concept, quote, the ghost that haunts every Western man, divorce. The language the source uses right here is incredibly heavy. It's evocative and it's deeply serious. It highlights this profound systemic fear that they believe dictates a lot of modern male behavior. So the crucial question is, why does this fear exist? Well, the podcast details some very specific legal and financial realities. They claim that within Western communities, the legal system routinely strips divorced men of their assets, their homes, and crucially, access to their children. According to the source, this reality makes Western marriage feel less like a safe haven and a lot more like a rigged battleground. So, if the West is being framed as this rigged battleground, where exactly do these men go? The podcast introduces an alternative in Section 3. The Filipina Sanctuary Ideal, devotion, faith, and family. The source describes this Eastern ideal as being deeply rooted in traditional values, with a really heavy focus on family integration and a profound respect for faith. Instead of endless competition, the podcast asserts that a Filipina brings this unshakable devotion and warmth to the relationship, essentially viewing her partner as a fellow family builder. This gives us a really fascinating side-by-side comparison of the two relationship paradigms as presented by the source. Under the Western dynamic, the man feels like he's locked in a transaction, literally forced to wear defensive armor every single day. But under the Eastern ideal, that armor just drops. He steps into the role of a secure provider, and he is met with what the source describes as genuine feminine energy. It's a complete shift in how the man is perceived, going from a competitor to a protector. Now, men don't just wake up one random Tuesday and accidentally change their entire life trajectory, right? Let's break down Section 4, the 3 turning points, the decision matrix. The first turning point is what they call the legacy realization. This is the moment, according to the source, where a man looks around at the fast-paced hookup culture surrounding him and realizes his lineage will end with him if he stays. He craves a lasting family legacy. And to actually achieve that, he requires a partner who genuinely values motherhood over the hyper-individualism that's so prevalent in his home country. The second turning point is the risk versus peace matrix. Notice those two words, risk and peace. The podcast frames this as a highly calculated decision where a man simply refuses to risk his financial future and his sanity in Western divorce courts. Instead, he shifts his focus entirely toward a culture that still views marriage as a sacred, long-term covenant. Basically, he chooses peace over a system that rewards temporary commitment. And finally, the devotion deficit. This is described as the absolute breaking point. It is the exact moment a man admits that, despite his career or his wealth, he is completely starving for emotional intimacy, validation, and genuine appreciation. The source assigns immense emotional weight to this. It's the realization that coming home to a partner who offers true devotion is just far more valuable than a life of endless competition. So, we've walked through the source's entire breakdown of this massive global shift, from the utter exhaustion of modern dating to the active pursuit of a sanctuary. The podcast leaves its audience with one final lingering thought. What is your turning point? Think about that for a second.